Welcome to Cultivated Live for, Tuesday, March 19th, 2024. I'm Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder of Cultivated Media and the host of Cultivated Live. Since we launched Cultivated, it's been our goal to be reader first, providing the cannabis industry with the most important, insightful, and useful information to our audience, primarily through our daily newsletter at cultivated.news. But we added this live stream about a month ago because we wanted to meet the industry where you are on LinkedIn and on YouTube through a daily live stream. And today, after we get through the news, we are going to be talking New York and the policy and maybe some politics too with Elizabeth Kase, the co-chair of the Cannabis Law Practice at Ruskin, Moscou, and Faltischek. She's going to tell me how I'm mispronouncing that in several different ways. She's based in New York. We're going to talk New York cannabis because it is almost always top of the news as it is today. We'll bring Liz on in a moment. But before we do, here is a rundown of today's news from Cultivated Daily. New York Governor Kathy Hochul has ordered a review of the state's Office of Cannabis Management and the slow licensing process just weeks after calling the rollout of the legal cannabis industry a disaster. She's tapped Jeanette Moy, the commissioner for the Office of General Services, to lead the review, and Moy will embed with the OCM for at least a month, that sounds fun, and make concrete recommendations as to how to improve the agency's functioning. Recall that New York Times' Ashley Southall first reported the review on Sunday. And here's what the governor had to say. Today, we take the first step in revamping New York's legal cannabis industry to ensure its long-term success. I have full confidence in Commissioner Moy's ability to identify areas that need improvement, establish standards and processes across agencies, and jumpstart the next phase of New York's legal cannabis market, end quote. Well, we hope all of that happens. It's going to be a full-scale review, and hopefully they'll be able to speed up the process to get the legal market in New York kicked off. Recall this comes in the heels of a blockbuster report from the New York Cannabis Insider documenting some pretty bad behavior from some folks in the OCM. Well, maybe we'll get Liz's take on some of this as we go on in this program. What else is happening? So, as part of an ongoing effort to overturn the federal government's prohibition in cannabis, a group of cannabis companies represented by the powerhouse firm of Boies, Schiller, and Flexner said in a court filing there's no rational basis for continuing prohibition, given that multiple states have recently legalized cannabis and the federal government hasn't done anything about it. Now, the filing was a response to the Justice Department's push in January to dismiss the lawsuit that these companies had filed. The suit is led by cannabis company Verano Holdings, along with a number of other firms, and was filed in a Massachusetts federal court. And more big cannabis companies say they're looking to follow Trulieve's lead and avoid 280E taxes, this according to Green Market Report. Here's something. A New York City smoke shop that was selling illegal cannabis was also found to be selling cocaine laced with fentanyl. This, according to a police source. The New York City Sheriff's Office raided the store in Midtown East last week. The store had previously been padlocked, but was back and open. We'll talk to Liz about that as well. And finally, the Cleveland School of Cannabis, that sounds fun, said it's the first cannabis industry training program to receive accreditation from the U.S. Department of Education. So that appears to be some news there. That is the news of the day. Give me one moment. I'm going to bring up Liz Kase. There you are. Hello.
Hello, Jay.
Nice to see you. Before we jump into what's going on in New York, did I see something come across my ticker feed that you've been called a city and state trailblazer in law as it relates to cannabis law? Does that sound right? Did I get that right?
Does that sound right? Well,
it sounds right to me, but is that right?
That remains to be seen, but that is correct. And I guess that was published yesterday. It's quite an honor to be on another cannabis list. And I'm joined by some pretty wonderful colleagues. So it's great. It's all great.
Well, is there a more interesting place to be practicing cannabis law than New York right now? I mean, it's a little bit of you practice banging your head against the wall, but what is your take of what's happened, let's say over the last month, from, let's say, when Governor Hochul called the rollout a disaster to now? It seems to be a lot in a fairly compressed amount of time.
You know, this is the story of New York cannabis, right? It's like you think you know what's happening, then there's this complete about face, then there's yet another, punch from the left, jab from the right, and things just, it's 52 card pickup constantly. I will say that at the end of 2023, things seemed very promising for a lot of people, right? The injunction had been lifted. Approximately 7,000 applications had gone in for adult use cannabis for various licensure. There was a fast track for people with real estate. Real estate is, as you know, always the hindrance to opening because of all the zoning laws that also are part and parcel of cannabis. And by Christmas break, New Year's, everybody had their fingers crossed that, like, okay, 2024, we're going to really seize this day. This is finally going to happen. And we kind of, once again, yawned our way through January, February. By the end of February, I actually think it was like maybe the last day of February, Governor Hochul had a press conference where she had various card applicant licensed individuals up on the stage. And really everyone was just yelling again at the inability to roll out cannabis, that the illicit shops had sort of taken over the business market share. And what was so strange about that press conference was that Governor Hochul really seemed to blame Yelp and Google as much as anyone else for the abject failure of the New York cannabis program. Cut to 3 weeks later, and now we have yet even more finger pointing. We have a suspension, or we have somebody who's on administrative leave, Damian Fagan, who is the chief equity officer, who is part and parcel to the rollout of this cannabis program in New York. And we have Jeanette Moy from the Office of
General Services, I think.
Thank you. I was going to say Inspector General, but General Services, who's now going to do a top to bottom review of Governor Hochul's cannabis team. And really, we can continue to go around this. It's not working.
Right.
This is not working. Millions and millions of dollars have been invested by thousands of people now to get this going, with the promise that this was going to be sort of the biggest demand market in the US. And we are 3 years into this. And, I could knock my head against the wall. So if you want to say practice in this market, yes, we're hoping that practice makes perfect. But how much longer do we need to practice? We'd like to see it actually happen.
Right. And it seems to me in other markets, well, usually it moves a bit faster for sure. But often in other markets, it's like local governments or municipalities or cities or counties can be the holdup, right? Like it's going fast in some places, slow in others because of the zoning and because of resistant local sort of jurisdictional things. That's not the case here necessarily.
Not even close.
It's like that they just can't seem to get licenses out the door. And let me ask you a question. I mean, there are important and I think aspirational goals from the New York market that to ensure equity, to ensure card licensees get their first, or was that? But like the challenges, I think, and is like you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and you can't, like, holding back a market and only having not even 100 stores open yet. Like there's just this floodgate that needs to open. And I would argue to the governor, and I don't want you to say it, but I'll say it, like the best way to combat the Google issue is to let more stores open legally. So there's more in Google My Business dispensaries that actually show up.
100%. So I just looked down at my notes. Apparently, as of today, 83 retail stores are open. That is far lower than the, close to 1,000 that was expected by 2024, certainly hundreds and hundreds in 2023. That did not happen. This is a top-down problem. I think the governor has to take a good look in the mirror and take some responsibility that, her administration did put forth this group of people, these individuals, to put forth a program. Maybe the law was imperfect. There were ways to improve the law. There could have been legislative initiatives to cure some of the defects. And instead, they let it ride and waited for the litigations. Litigation is a disaster for a new program because it created this real blockade. This injunction essentially gave New York State the ability to say, oh, we can't do anything now because the courts have stopped us. That's a horrible excuse for letting, months and months and months go by. There were card applicants who had been approved, some 300 of them, who hadn't yet opened their stores. So they actually had a license. They couldn't open. They were trying to acquire real estate. The government did not approve their real estate. And the government, I'm talking about OCM, to make the initial approvals. Then they might need to go to their local municipalities to get secondary approvals for time, place, and manner restrictions. That didn't happen. Then, to make matters even more complicated, once the injunction was lifted, they opened their portal again for these 7,000 more applications. They created a bifurcated structure where people could apply with real estate and without real estate. And the real estate holders were thought to be fast-tracked through. This is very, very important because that was an enormous incentive. If you're a serious person,
start paying rent,
who's not a card applicant, who doesn't have that justice involvement criteria to go in that early round that was back in 2022 into 2023, then what do you do? Well, if you're well funded, you're going to start paying rent, right? But that was inherently risky for two very important reasons. One, there was no understanding that you had a real shot even with real estate because it was going to be a lottery system. So on one hand, the idea that you'd be ranked without knowing who the applicant was by just the randomness, the random selection of a lottery, was supposed to make an equal playing field for all people who were similarly situated. I can sort of understand that. Where I can't understand that logic is when they don't then put the next layer of the map, the proximity map, on top of the applicant's viability. That only came out this month. This is really critically important. 7,000 people applied with and without real estate, without really understanding the proximities that might be barriers for their own entry. So they signed up for leases. They started paying for leases, not knowing that they may be boxed out because now they're within 1,000 or 2,000 feet from another retail dispensary. This is really unfair. There are more lawsuits that have started. I believe there will be more lawsuits on the way. You and I have spoken about this for years now. Real estate is cannabis. Cannabis is real estate. And for there not to have been more of a sense of how people go about ensuring their actual locations ahead of this is really sort of the first curiosity of cannabis. And this dates back to the card program, the first articulation of how anyone would be licensed in New York. There was supposed to be a huge amount of money to help those who were financially disadvantaged by their cannabis convictions. They were supposed to have real estate assigned to them, which some argued was sort of the Havana of cannabis, or, it wasn't necessarily the most capitalistic notion that you were going to get this location. You basically get to pick a region and not a location, deal with it, take it.
Right.
And that didn't happen. There were so few card licensees that actually got assigned properties. They're out trying to get their properties like everyone else is. So there really was no advantage to being early. A lot of card license holders who actually got that license reapplied as a non-card license holder, thinking they could have a leg up in this next round rather than wait for the government's approval or handout for physical locations that were promised. So that's just the retail. We haven't even talked about the farmers.
Right, the rest of it, right.
And the rest of it is as crazy as that.
Is it?
Yes, it is. And that is sort of the last step of this. But the first step of this was, again, born in early 22 when conditional cultivators received their license and the promise.
And said, go cultivate.
Go cultivate. Go make your product. We will have a place to sell it. Didn't happen. There are approximately 300,000 pounds that were sitting on shelves by the end of 2023. I don't know, you might know better than me what the quality of a stale product looked like. What can you do with that? Is there any, sub-market that, okay.
You don't even want to know what the sub-market is. It's right. Like that's that's part of the problem.
And while that was happening and farmers who were distressed to begin with were putting their life savings into cultivating a legal, lawful, regulated product, there is a proliferation statewide of illicit stores selling product that has nothing to do with New York growers.
Right.
And so now you can sort of see this implosion from within and the explosion that's coming down. There no two parts are meeting in a chain here.
Right. And the enforcement on said illicit market is limited and challenging. Yes?
To say the least. So I don't know if you remember my background, but I'm a former prosecutor out of the Manhattan DA's office. And for the last 25 years, I know I look so great. I know I can't even believe I can say
Only
that.
22.
I know. But for about 25 years now, I've been in the criminal law practice for the last 20 as a defense attorney. And, look, clients of mine have been locked up for much less. Part of MRTA, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act that passed in 2021, was to destigmatize and try and right those institutionalized wrongs. And one of the most stated, over and over stated wrong was the enforcement against Black and Brown communities. So what has happened since 2021? Well, the law did not include a policing as part of cannabis. Cannabis was decriminalized. So there wasn't a legitimate way for law enforcement to go after illicit cannabis in the sense of, street sales, like low level, under 3 ounces. That wasn't happening anymore. But on the books, it is still a crime to sell to a minor, to sell in large quantities. You're also not paying taxes, right? So there's this huge other incentive for the government to go after all of these illicit stores because they're not paying their fair share on the products that they're selling. So they're getting away twofold. They're not selling New York-based product that's lab tested. They're not selling anything that is government regulated. And the government is losing out day after day on millions upon millions of dollars of taxes. So when you bring up that a Midtown East store is closed up for not only selling illicit cannabis, but also selling cocaine laced with fentanyl, as a mother, this is where I get really crazy because this is exactly what this wasn't supposed to be. And it's like the inmates are running the asylum. And the laws have not been promulgated for enforcement to take hold of this situation. As you stated, that store had been previously padlocked. I'm sure that store is in litigation for the padlocking. I'm sure they were able to undo an injunction or whatever that, immediate closure was, pay a small fine while they continue doing their regular course of business, whatever that meant, have their day in court someday in the future, which is probably long time from now, and go on about their way. In the meantime, now they're also selling cocaine laced with fentanyl. So this is just a situation that's off the rails.
Let me ask you a question, a crystal ball question. So
Yeah.
We're not going to come back to you to make sure this is right or wrong, but so now there is this review of the OCMs, right? By the someone from the Offices of General Services. It's supposed to take a month. It seems like it might take more than a month to do a top to bottom, although it's not even a huge operation, the OCM. Do you anticipate, so say it takes all of April, that in May, there'll be this recommendation that says, here is the fastest the Venn diagram of fastest and best way forward to get the market jump started now. Is that what's expected? And how do you even do that? It's hard to do that.
Well, I think what we're seeing, because the budget comes out in a couple of weeks, the end of March, and people around here, they call it the big ugly, what gets sort of put in a budget right at the end so that everyone is sort of satisfied. And
or everybody's the same dissatisfied.
Yeah. I mean, it's New York. No one's ever happy here. I mean, we're all really happy, but we're not really happy. It's this kind of conundrum. But one of the things that's very notable in the initiatives that are going into the budget is led by the Assembly and the Senate for $128 million bailout for the farmers. So this is, to me, that's a signal that they are going to try and pay for their problems and buy their way through some good press, good PR, try and regather the earnest nature of what those farmers were trying to do, what the system was trying to do, and re-enfranchise those people as part of this. Because what is going to happen really later in this year, when they get through all of the 7,000 applications, is they're also going to see large scale cultivators and MSOs come in who are going to potentially eviscerate the small farmer yet again.
Right.
So there are some, I would say that's sort of a tell as to, it's like an acceptance that there is real problem. And if they don't start paying for their problem, they're really not going to have a cannabis marketplace. This is going to, I mean, if it's already off the rails, it's really off the rails. To answer your question about the crystal ball, though, I would say this. I don't know how, sitting here now, today, the end of, or the middle of March, how they are going to rectify the 7,000 applications that are waiting with the map that is so it is so complicated for anyone in the queue awaiting their application to potentially get ready to either pivot to a different location. It's like they're not really giving everyone all of the information. If they start to do that, that could help. But I think that train has also left the station. So what can we actually do? We might not, I don't know if we're going to see cannabis, sort of crop up, if you will, in a brick and mortar store, where they are essentially taking the real estate out of it to say maybe we need to start doing a proliferation of websites and online stores so that people can start buying the product that's sitting on the shelves. I mean, I have a lot of ideas I'd love to give the governor. No one's asked me, but
maybe they will. Maybe they will. Well, whatever happens, we're going to have you back to talk about it, because I just wanted to have this conversation to like set the stage of what seems like an inflection point. What is it inflecting to? I guess we'll find out. But it does seem like this is an inflection point to hopefully put like a comma or a semicolon or period on the end of a fairly rocky road to date. But maybe going forward, there might be something different or a path forward in New York.
Well, I think this, Jay, for sure. And this is something like, at the end of the year and the early 2024 time, my colleagues and I, we sit around and we say, so what's going to be hot this year, right? I mean, we've been saying cannabis is going to be hot this year.
I do not believe you.
Instead of saying cannabis is going to be hot this year, we're actually saying enforcement is going to be hot this year. And I foresee that being one of the larger crimes that comes out of New York City, New York City proper, the 5 boroughs, if not also the suburbs, because that is something that they can pivot to enforce. It's very possible to put a task force together and bring state troopers in, sheriffs in, really embolden law enforcement to not just padlock a store, but to really take them out. By putting the landlords also into the responsibility chain, that could incentivize some of people to take stock of their own happenings inside of their commercial spaces and really start to perform ouster or evict tenants that are performing illegal activity. It's very important that landlords start to realize what's happening under their roofs.
Or at least stop turning a blind eye, I guess.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
That will be, I mean, not to predict that will be pretty unpopular, I would imagine, in some progressive communities, especially. So it's just like, it's almost, there are decisions to be made and each has their own sort of decision tree branched off of it that is less good than if they had gotten it closer to right in 2022.
Well, when I was taking my clients down to their local municipal zoning hearings when we were doing the applications back in the fall, I was shocked by how many Brooklyn and Queens, they're like local committee members, right, who sit on like a zone for their commercial districts. And, we were making our pitch for why, each client, there are many different people trying to get the identified proximity in their regions to apply then for the October and November, or the November and December rounds for retail dispensaries. And the pushback from these local municipalities was astonishing. They are very confused by MRTA. They don't understand what OCM's doing. They don't understand the lack of enforcement. And from their point of view, they'd rather say no to all legal cannabis, even though there are illicit stores in their communities, than allow for a lawful store to exist. And when I challenged the board to say, I'm sorry, we're on the same page here. We want lawful product, lab tested product, taxable product, no under 21s in the store, regulated hours, et cetera, et cetera. They said, oh yeah, that's nice, that's good. But we already have 10 cannabis stores in our community. Why do we want to make it 11? And, that's the naivete and ignorance that the lawful regulated community is also battling now. It's really astonishing. So, all of our attempts to say, hey, once you get a regulated store in your community, it should be logical that those other stores will go away and be padlocked. What promises can you give us, Liz, that that's actually going to happen? I can't really say that I can promise.
And this goes back to your point. What might be hot in 2024? Potentially enforcement on those unregulated, illicit, legacy. Pick your word. Those shops. Liz, I do want to thank you for your time this morning. As always, nice to see you. For those that don't know, who haven't watched Liz and I talk to each other before, Liz and I went to summer camp together not that long ago. Just kidding.
It was in the 80s.
It was a very long time ago, but it's nice to see you again, and have a good day. We appreciate the time and your expertise, and congratulations on your recent acknowledgement as a trailblazer of cannabis law.
Jay, it's always great to see you, to be with you. And I also always love to remark that apparently these style glasses, must have been part of our uniform.
I can't get off of them. It's like every time I buy a new pair of glasses, my wife's like, they look like the other glasses you just took off. I was like, I know, but nice. The things change slowly. I appreciate it, Liz. I'm going to wrap up the show. That's it for today's Cultivated Live. We encourage you to subscribe to our daily newsletter at cultivated.news. Follow us on LinkedIn. Smash the subscribe button on YouTube. We'll be back here again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. My friend, co-founder, and editor-in-chief, Jeremy Burke of Cultivated. Have a great Tuesday, everybody. Remember, buy cannabis at your local legal dispensary. It's going to be hard to find in some places in New York, but please do that. Liz, have a great day.
You too, Jay. Take it easy, everyone.